Hello and welcome to another episode of Pittsburgh Sports Memories. In this episode, we'll be covering Pittsburgh versus the refs. So we're gonna kind of let all our hate out and anger on those officials. As we'll quote the English poet Alexander Pope. He once said, "To err is human, but to forgive is divine." But I don't think Alexander Pope had many football games or baseball games on the line when he made that quote. So. Well, hopefully, going through this, we'll find a little catharsis and closure for ourselves on this because I know I'm pretty passionate. What do you? It's usual. Tim, his here co-hosting with me. What do you think, Tim? You got some passionate opinions on these?
Yes, and the refs are always wrong unless, of course, the call went in our favor.
Then they were 100% right.
Yes,
Ah,
yes.
I like that logic. Yes,
hmm
that works for me. All right. Well, we'll start out with the egregious, I guess, against, and then we'll go to we kind of have overblown, and then four. We'll finish the ones that went in our favor. So it isn't all bad. So
Yeah, we're trying to be balanced here and recognize that sometimes we were the beneficiary of bad calls.
sometimes, yes,
Sometimes, rarely.
maybe once in a while, but so first up in the against category is coin toss 1998, and everybody knows this one. Game is versus Detroit on Thanksgiving, which the Steelers normally don't play on Thanksgiving that often unless it falls on a Sunday, which I guess then everybody would play. The game is tied going into overtime, so the Steelers are the visitors and they get to make the call. And at this time, it was sudden death overtime. So Jerome Bettis calls tails. Phil Luckett said the call was heads. Hilarity ensues because, like, you can kind of hear him say tails, but like we'll get into that further. So what happens is the Detroit Lions get the ball. Charlie Batch, who plays for the Lions at this time, actually drives them in the field goal lane range, and they kick the game-winning field goal. Luckett says he goes over in his explanation to Bill Cowher and says that Bettis called a and then tails, therefore the call is heads. So, and this was also when they flipped the coin, you would call it in the air. I don't know why they did. They thought that was more fair to do it that way, but it is kind of like, I guess, just a way, you've called like coin flips, right, Tim? I mean, why do they do it in the any reason why they do it in the air? I don't know. It's just was
Well, I know it changed after this game.
yeah,
They stopped doing it because of
it's
this
of
game.
this, yeah.
Like you
So
had to give your final answer before the coin was flipped.
yeah, so and the team that won the coin toss at that time won about 60% of the time the game. Like we said, the NFL did change the rule. I actually think they changed it actually the next week, right? Or was it after the season?
I think it might have been the next week. Yeah.
Yeah, where you had to call it before. You would just say the ref would go to you and say, "What is your call?" And you would say heads, and they say, "So it's heads," and be like, "Yes, no givebacks. Yes, you got to go with that." Um, I don't think, and also they changed the overtime to not sudden death after poor Brett Favre got jobbed out of his Super Bowl by those
That was
evil
such a
Saints.
shame.
Yeah, I
Such a
know.
shame.
And it's led to more tied games, which I mean everybody loves a good tie. So the Steelers collapsed that year, so I'm not sure this coin toss did much except for speed up the collapse. I mean, they really just kind of fell apart that whole season after that. Maybe that was just kind of the beginning. Phil Luckett, who was the official, he actually was the head official at a Vinny Testaverde game where Testaverde, who played for the Jets at that time, was called in for a touchdown that cost Dennis Erickson his job in Seattle. But that wasn't Luckett's fault because it was the head linesman's call. He just was the head referee. Luckett was also the official at the Music City Miracle game between Buffalo and Tennessee, and he had the rule on a controversial lateral by Frank Wycheck to Kevin Dyson. So, like, he's kind of involved in like three incidents within what, 2 or 3 seasons here. And I think like Phil just figured he had enough. So he was like, move me to back judge, like just hide me somewhere where no one will care. Well, unfortunately, Fate was like really mad at Phil at that time. Maybe didn't like, offended the gods in some way. But there's a Saints game where like they run a flea flicker and Phil gets hit with the ball because he's like standing back where he should, and like they like Aaron Brooks, yeah, the quarterback for the Saints, like whips it 30 yards, and Joe Horn like literally can't get to the ball because Phil Luckett's in the way, and it hits off Phil Luckett. So
And he was wide open on that play, if I remember correctly. Like it
yeah, Phil
literally
Luckett he would have scored easily.
I think it
Yeah, Joe
literally
Horn was wide open too. Yeah,
cost them a touchdown. Yeah, he had
yeah.
some really bad luck there. The Vinny Testaverde call was probably one of the most egregious calls I've ever seen. He literally lands at the 1 yard line.
But
and
that
they say
wasn't Phil's
touchdown.
call. That he just was in charge when that happened.
But he still kind of took the blame for it because
Yeah,
it's like, oh,
yeah,
this guy again.
He was the captain of the Titanic that was down asleep while his first mate was running the boat into the iceberg.
Right.
Is what happened,
Yes.
But he still goes down with the ship like a good captain. But much like Captain Smith on the Titanic, Phil Luckett did retire from officiating in 2007. Jerome Bettis, after all that, said in an interview that he did say a sound because, and this is Jerome Bettis logic, he called heads to start the game, and he did not want to call heads twice in one game. He wanted to call tails, but he started to say, but maybe he was trying to say head tails, tail heads. Maybe he was trying to call both at the same time. I don't know. Bettis also stated that this got him fired from the coin toss by head coach Bill Cowher. So that was the end of Jerome Bettis's coin toss calling career, at least in the NFL. So I don't know if he did it at Notre Dame, but he still made the Hall of Fame. So all's well that ends well for Jerome, and I think even Phil Luckett's doing okay. So. We have all this linked there. A lot of this stuff there would be references to. There's a lot of links like websites and that you can watch video on this. We'll have that on our website, which is Pittsburgh Sports Memories at Weebly.com. Did I get it right?
.weebly.com. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, look at me. I had like 2 years in, and I finally learned a website. Wee. Yeah.
This call, I think, this call being on Thanksgiving. I mean, everybody saw it. It was like a Thanksgiving Day game. So that definitely amplified it. And it was just so like, how can you mess up the coin toss? But to your point, Steve, like the Steelers were definitely on their way down that year. And even that game, they had collapsed to allow the Lions to send it to overtime. And then like they lost the coin toss, and then they let Detroit drive all the way down the field and kick the field goal. They didn't have to do that either. So I don't know. It was bad. It was almost like comical, but I don't know that it was like, cost the Steelers that much. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think too, like maybe I'll probably say this more than once in this episode, is like half a life is what happens to you. The other half is how you react to it. So little life lesson there, I guess. Next on in our against category is Jerry Meals says it's safe. And this is pretty fun. Pirates, they have this great first half of the season. On July 25th, the Pirates beat the Braves 3-1, and they go into a tie for first place in the NL Central, which is surprising because the Pirates had stunk for 19 years before that. Normally by July 25th, it was like, when do the Steelers start training camp? But so the Pirates play the next night, and the game goes on for 19 innings in Atlanta. So, and this is kind of weird that it's in Atlanta too, because this is, obviously the Pirates have had success since they lost that one night in Atlanta in 1992. With the game still tied in the 19th inning, the Braves have a runner at third base, and that runner is Julio Lugo. And he's at third, and he's running home on a tapper, like this relief pitcher called Scott Proctor, because they didn't have any players left because it was like the 19th inning, so they couldn't pinch hit for him. So he hits a tapper back to the Pirates pitcher's name was McCutcheon, and no, it wasn't Andrew. I think it was Daniel maybe. And he throws like a perfect throw to Michael McHenry, the catcher for the Pirates. And Michael McHenry, because they had changed the rules too, you couldn't block the plate anymore. He tags him on the leg, and I mean, the ball was there probably like 10 feet before Lugo was there. And he had like turned there and just kind of tagged him. But Jerry Meals just figured it's 2 a.m. You know what? It's time to go home and, go to bed. So he said, "No, they're safe. Game's over." And I mean, in Jerry Meals' defense, he had called last call since it was close to 2 a.m. So the Pirates knew the game was almost over. But the best part is when you watch the replays that'll be, around, listen to Greg Brown's call. He's like absolutely incredulous. He's like, he calls him safe. He's safe. It's like unbelievable. And it's one of the more obvious wrong calls in sports. It's as bad as there was a guy named Don Denneker in the 1985 World Series. But hey, the Cardinals got screwed on that one. So who cares about that?
And the Don Deckinger play that you're talking about, that was like a split second. I mean, that was wrong. It was definitely wrong. But I mean, it was literally like the guy was playing first base.
Right. And he was only out by like maybe a half step, a step. This was out by like 10 feet.
And that call was like the foot on the bag versus like the first baseman's foot on the bag, ball on the glove, other guy's foot on the bag. You're having to watch like three things at once. This was literally just like he came to the plate. There was no room. He got tagged and the umpire is just like safe. I mean, it defied explanation.
Well, Julio Lugo had an explanation. Here's his quote about the McHenry tag. "I didn't feel the tag," Lugo said. "He made the right call. I got in there." And I say that's the biggest whopper of a lie, since I did not have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky.
Yeah, he makes like a sweeping motion, McHenry, with the glove, and he obviously like scrapes him on the leg. Again, it's just it made no sense. It just made no sense. And in a vacuum, because again, it was costly for the Pirates, but in a vacuum, it may just be the worst call I've ever seen. It's not the worst call because there were other calls that were more important to the moment than this one, but just out of sheer, like, take everything else off the table, just so obviously wrong. I don't even know what else to say. I mean, and that was on like the Good Morning America shows the next day. I mean,
yeah, it was because I think this is the same season that who was that pitcher for the Tigers?
Oh yeah, he got robbed as a perfect game.
Yeah, I had his name in here.
But that was another, again, play at first base that was very close. And yeah, the umpire got it wrong, and he said he got it wrong. He felt about getting it wrong. But the bang bang play, I feel like, is okay. That's human error. We're not, all of us aren't perfect. That's going to happen. This was literally like the guy came to the plate, the catcher was right there blocking him. Did you ever see The Naked Gun?
Yeah.
There's a scene in there, like Leslie Nielsen's impersonating the umpire, dressed up as the umpire. He's trying to stop the game from going to the 7th inning stretch. And there's a play where the catcher like jumps in front of the plate and the guy slides right into his like legs. He doesn't even touch the plate. And Leslie Nielsen's like, "Save." It's like, just because he's trying to keep the game going. And it reminds me of that play. Like, that's all I could think of when that happened, was like Leslie Nielsen in Naked Gun.
Yeah. Well, it led to a bunch of hilarious memes on the internet of Jerry Meals saying things are safe. Like, people are like, "Oh, here's some expired cottage cheese. Let's see what Jerry Meals has to say. It's safe." Like, let's go like walk in the middle of traffic. Jerry Meals says it's safe. So lots of fun with him on the internet, I guess. The Pirates, once again, it's not what you have done to you, it's how do you respond? Well, they respond like the Pirates always do. They go to have a major collapse, only winning 19 games the rest of the season. And they do so badly that they have their 19th consecutive losing season. So I'm not sure why the Pirates, when they lose in Atlanta, it just causes major, problems like for a long term. I mean, this should have just been like a weird footnote to this season, and maybe they don't make the playoffs that year, but they at least should have probably broken the streak that year. So just a bad luck and a bad call. I mean, 19 innings is a long game. I don't know what to say about that, but it did lead. That's what ended up, that in that call with the Tigers game ended up the next season baseball went to replay. So some small condolences or consolation for the Pirates. So next up, we're sticking on the theme of baseball is the Chung Ho Gong slide. This is more maybe, I don't know how to I mean, it definitely went against the Pirates, but I just, this one really bothers me. So in a game on September 15th in 2015 with 2 men on and nobody out, Chung Ho Gong, who's playing shortstop, tries to turn a double play, and he's the victim of a takeout slide by Cubs player Chris Coghlan. Now, Chung Ho Gong was from Korea. He was a Korean baseball player, and he'd been around a little while in Korea, but he was a pretty good player over there. And the Pirates, this is the first time they actually paid money to get a foreign player. And he had actually won NL Rookie of the Month in July. And so he had a really good season. But once he tore his MCL, he was out for the season, and he was one of the Pirates' best hitters that year. The Pirates still had one of the best seasons that they've had recently. They won 98 wins, but they lost to Jake Arrieta and the Cubs in that wild card game. Gee, maybe having another good hitter in the lineup would have helped. No. Kong ended up running into a bunch of legal troubles. He got 3 DUIs and lost his visa due to this. He was suspended until 2019 when he only hit like 169 when he came back, and he had 10 home runs. The Pirates got rid of him. And as of 2020, he's tried to go back to Korea to play baseball, but he's serving a 1-year suspension due to those 3 DUIs. He never really recovered after the injury. But in another like weird, we don't care when it's the Pirates, but we care when it's everybody else kind of move. The Major League Baseball changed the rule about takeout slides in the offseason of that same year because once again, another incident happened, much like the Jerry Meals save call. Chase Utley broke Ruben Tejada's leg in a playoff game. Well, the difference between, Coghlan and Kong and this one was, well, Ruben Tejada plays for the Mets, and the Mets are a big market team with a lot of money, and we can't have them getting unfairly, hurt. But when it's Chung Ho Gong and just the measly little Pirates, who cares about them? They don't bring us no money. The best part was MLB made a statement on the matter when they were going to suspend Utley, but didn't. Major League Baseball dropped Utley's suspension on March 6th of 2016, with Chief Baseball Officer Joe Torre stating there wasn't anything clear cut to say that play violated a rule. And if you watch this slide in the Gong, like Coghlan is nowhere near the base. Like he isn't sliding in the second. He is over sliding second. He literally tries to slide in the center field. I mean, it's so egregious and just intent to injure. And just like Joe Madden was like, oh, it's a good, clean, hard baseball play. And this guy was just, he didn't even try and talk to like Gong when Gong came back the next. It was just another reason I wish the Cubs never, and the Cubs were rewarded with a World Series through this. And it's just like, I hope they go another 200 years and never win another World Series. I never had a problem with the Cubs until like this. It's just in Madden. What a piece of, what I don't have much respect for him either, but
that was the thing I remember most about that play, because this happened in baseball for years, but when it happened, you're at least have the like, dude, I was just trying to get to second base. Like I was sliding into second base. You were standing there. And in this case, he didn't even aim for second base. He wasn't nowhere near second base. He just totally aimed for the player. I mean, it was just a total targeting. And then they just were like, well, that's what happens. I mean, he was sliding. It's like sliding into what?
Well, so, that too, they got rid of the neighborhood play. Remember? They'd be like, oh, you were in the neighborhood a second, we'll just call you out. Well, that was to eliminate crap like this, and then it was just like you said, it was just annoying, and nobody cared. Nobody's like, oh, that's just baseball. That's just baseball. Oh, well, I guess from Ruben Tejada, that just wasn't baseball anymore. And once again, I just totally, baseball, like why baseball just keeps losing fans and stuff, besides like all the other stuff that goes on, is just crap like this. It's like you literally serve the 4 fan bases in the league. There's 4 fan bases that matter, and everybody else you don't care about. So
Well,
watch people tune it out more and more, I guess.
and going back to your Brett Favre thing, I mean, they changed the overtime rules when Brett Favre didn't get the ball in overtime in the playoffs. But a few years earlier, when Tommy Maddox didn't get the ball against the Titans, no one even cared. I mean, it wasn't even an issue. So it's interesting when things all of a sudden become an issue, only when they happen to certain teams. Now, that being said, we will have at least one item later on this list that actually does force a rule change. So it's not universal, but definitely in this case, yeah, they could have cared less about the Pirates.
So moving on, the 1992 NLCS strike zone. And this is another thing we've kind of covered in other podcasts. So this is going back to that unfortunate night in October of 1992. It's the Game 7 of the 92 NLCS. Winner goes to the World Series. The loser goes home. John McSherry leaves the game in the second inning. He's the home plate umpire. He has extreme dizziness. Randy Marsh moves from first base to behind home plate. The difference between Randy Marsh and John McSherry is John McSherry is liking to get the game over and calls more strikes. And Randy Marsh calls a smaller or tighter strike zone because I guess he wants to make it more difficult to hit. I don't know. Or no, I don't know. But whatever. He likes more offense. So you have two different strike zones is the problem. And it's okay when I guess it's the whole game, but this kind of, well, the second inning isn't that far into it. But so what happens later in the game is a smaller strike zone does come into play in the ninth inning, and it leads to that pivotal walk by Damon Berryhill on pitches that might have been called strikes if John McSherry's more liberal strike zone had been employed. And we've gone over this in our what was that 20 it was the night that baseball died podcast much more in depth. Cabrera, of course, gets his hit, and the rest is history. Sid Bream slides in. There were other factors in this. I'd like to put Jose Lean made an error that gave the Braves an extra out. Barry Bonds refusing to move in left field when Andy Van Slyke told him to. Instead, he gave him the finger. I mean, how'd that work out for Barry there? Stan Belinda, poor he kind of lives on in infamy to this day. And but maybe if McSherry also, if he comes in and that guy Berryhill still walks, maybe he calls Sim Bream out at that play on the Bonds throw, and the Pirates and Braves play extra innings. Could you imagine that? So there is kind of like a lot of different ways that could have went, but I think we've talked about that before. You know how much of an impact that had in the game. But once again, you gotta play with the umpires you have. You can't go back and change that. So maybe if Jose Lean doesn't make an error, maybe Barry Bonds is in the right spot. They they make it to the World Series and probably lose to Toronto, who is really good.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Steve, about what you do with whenever life gives you that bad luck, what you do with it, and like that wasn't even. It wasn't like Randy Marsh was making like these egregiously bad calls. It was just he wasn't supposed to be there. Like that was not the umpire that they would have chosen for Game 7 of the NLCS. They would have chosen a guy that maybe they chose a guy. They chose McSherry. And like you said, McSherry would have called strikes there. And like you said, even though it was early in the game, it was still a change that you had to adjust to. But it wasn't like necessarily the wrong call. It was just a totally unfortunate set of events because McSherry was not in good health. And, I don't know. I just feel like it was more bad luck than like an awful call, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Well, we'll go back to football since we had a couple baseball ones there. The 2005 Troy interception versus the Colts. And this is a perfect example of life gives you a bad break and you know what? You overcome it. And this is probably one of the reasons that this is one of my favorite Steeler games of all time. The Steelers are playing the Colts. The Colts are the number 1 seed in the AFC playoffs. This game is in Indianapolis. The Steelers have a lead late in the game and need to make a play as the Colts have cut the Steelers' lead down to 11 points. So Polamalu makes a big interception to seal the win with 5:26 left in the game. As he catches the ball, he rolls around to the ground, and then as he stands up, in the process of standing up, his knee, Polamalu's own knee, knocks the ball out of his hand. Well, after a lengthy review and like literally like Dungy, it was just like one of those classic, like, let's just throw out a review. You never know. They do this in football teams all the time. Like, let's just throw it out there. You never know which way it's going to go. Which probably says more about the review process in the NFL than anything else. So referee Pete Morelli decides that it's not an interception. And I think I forget he's even definite, like, when you watch the video and you hear him review what his decision is, it's nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense what he's saying. He's like, as the player stood up, he knocked the ball out of his own hand or something. It's odd. And it's just, there's no reason. He caught the ball, he controlled it, he rolled around on the ground, and when he was standing up, so he survived the ground, even if, and that rule wasn't even in effect back then. Even if it was under the other rule that they brought in later, it still would have qualified. So it's just no football reason for this to be overturned. And I've always thought to this day that like TV makes a lot of, they just want to see games go down to the wire. And this was like 5 minutes left in the game. It just would have been totally meaningless. The game would have been over at that point. And I just think TV said, nope, Peyton Manning's not losing the ball like that, you know? The best part is that like Joey Porter and let's see, at least the insane ending of a Dallas Clark TD, a Joey Porter sack, a Jerome Bettis fumble, an immaculate tackle by Big Ben, and a field goal missed by an idiot kicker from Canada. So if they don't have that overturn of a call, all of that other fun stuff never happens, and the NFL doesn't get tons of ratings, and we aren't really we probably me and Tim probably remember this game, but maybe like all the other millions of people that remember this game don't really remember it as fondly if it wasn't for that overturn. So
isn't that ironic? I mean, it was such a bad call, but like you said, if that never happens, then it's not the all-time never forget it the rest of your life classic. So that's kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, I too, I think, doesn't the NHL now, if you do just like frivolous challenges, they penalize you for that? Besides losing a timeout, I think you actually get a penalty or something. So maybe the NFL should go to something like that. Like you lose possession of the ball or you get like a 15-yard personal foul penalty or something.
But that even wouldn't have mattered then because the Colts, like Tony Dungy, had nothing to lose at that point. Like
right.
Said,
even if you penalize in 15 yards, who
yeah,
cares? Yeah.
Game's over either way. So
yeah,
he was going to challenge that no matter what.
Yeah. So it's on to the 1989 Oilers snow game. Tim, I will let you take it away on this one here.
Yeah, this one's one I remember real clearly. Probably not one that a ton of Steelers fans remember, but I was at this game, and what had happened. So it's late in the season. It's middle of December, and the AFC Central at that time had 4 teams. Cleveland and Houston have 7 wins. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati have 6 wins. It's an absolute log jam for the division for the playoffs. And now Pittsburgh and Houston are playing each other at 3 River Stadium, and Pittsburgh has a chance. Which in this era the Steelers stunk. Remember, so them beating the Oilers, overtaking them in the division was that possibility was just huge. And I was so excited to go to this game because I was a kid at the time. I was maybe like 12 years old, and most of my time being a Steelers fan, I never saw the Steelers compete for anything. And so probably at the time, this was the biggest game I had ever seen in person or period or watched on TV. And it started snowing, which we were all excited about because Houston played in a dome and they had this high-powered offense, and there's snow on the field, that'll slow them down. And it did. The game was tied 16-16 with like 2 minutes left. Warren Moon airs out a pass down the left sideline for Haywood Jeffries. He catches it, but one of his legs clearly comes down on the white paint. They call it a catch. They had instant replay back then, but it's really hard to see on the replay because they didn't have the high def TV, and because the fact that there's snow on the field, everything's white. Everything's white. The Oilers had like white shoes and white socks, so Jeffrey's foot was white. Everything was white. You couldn't really see it on the replay. but his foot was definitely out of bounds, and they called him inbounds. The Oilers end up getting the game-winning score, and they passed the Steelers in the division. The Steelers appeared to be done at that point. They were 6-7, but they won their last 3 games, and they end up getting the last laugh here because they did make the playoffs. They had to go to Houston for the playoffs, but they beat Houston in Houston, as we've talked about in some previous episodes. But I just remember that being in the snow, and like I don't know. Again, it's hard to tell on the replay, but I hate to say I was there and it was on my side of the field and I saw it. I will to this day say he was way out of bounds.
Well, Oilers Jerry Glanville said, if we got away with one more than we deserved, I feel real bad about that. Well, not real bad. So Jerry Glanville. And this quote, like, maybe like really get some respect for Chuck Noll. However, Chuck Noll refused to blame the loss on the extra timeout, or I guess they gave Houston an extra timeout, or Jeffrey's catch, but rather the Steelers' inability to score in close yardage situations. They twice had first downs inside the Oilers' 3-yard line, only come away with 2 chip shot Gary Anderson field goals. We had 4 scores and they had 3 scores, but we didn't get quality scores. We got field goals instead of touchdowns. You have to, when you have the opportunity to put the ball in the end zone, you've got to put it in. I just like the accountability from Chuck Noll, and maybe that's why. Let's see. Chuck Noll has 4 Super Bowls. How many Super Bowls has Jerry Glanville even been in?
That would be 0.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah.
And like you said, the Steelers did get the last laugh beating the Oilers, and Chuck Noll got to tell off Jerry Glanville during a handshake once. So it was a good time was had by all, I guess.
And I think that is one thing about bad calls is that sometimes, sometimes they end up making a difference at the end of the game. But then you can also say that if you'd done the things right earlier in the game, that would have been inconsequential. So,
yeah. Moving on to overcoming the calls, I guess is kind of stay in the overcoming the calls category. 13-9 holding calls. Pitt is playing the number 2 WVU in Morgantown. That's their football team, the Mountaineers. Pitt football is a 28.5-point underdog. WVU is ranked number 2 in the country, and if they win, they will play for a berth in the BCS game for a shot at the national title. At that time, this is probably the biggest game in WV football history, and a big game for the Big East Conference in general. And that was because the Big East Conference was considered a basketball conference and was lightly regarded in football. And plus, like the big Miami, who was their big torchbearer at that time, was leaving for the ACC along with Virginia Tech and Boston College. So the Big East really wanted like WVU to kind of like be they're the new face of the league. So with Pitt leading 10-7 in the third quarter, it's 3rd and 5 from the WVU 13. Pitt running back LaShawn McCoy makes a sweet move on the WVU defender Antonio Lewis and scores a TD that would have made the Pitt lead 17-7. But wait, there's a late holding call on O'Derek Turner that is questionable at best. And I mean, it's really questionable. Like both the announcers were definitely questioning that. And Dave Wannstedt had like crutches at the time, almost like broke his crutches, throwing them on the ground. There's also another holding call later in the game, I think against Turner again, that wipes out a big first down. And there was a ridiculous like personal foul call against Eric Thatcher. Like he just literally like pumped his fist or something. He didn't get in anybody's face or anything. It was just the officials were just out of hand. Even the announcer, Mike Patrick, who is a WVU native, so like he's hardly like one to be biased towards Pitt. He questions the calls. Another fun like little internet meme thing that happened was someone edited the calls from the game with the scene from the Remember the Titans, where like what was the name of the actor in that? I can't remember his name, but he goes, I'll go to the papers and bring all the refs down. Me, I don't care, because like I guess the refs were sticking it to like Denzel Washington and him, in that game. So it was pretty interesting. It just keeps WVU in the game, but Pitt yeah, like I said, they overcome all that and they still beat WVU and the Big East officials. And it's 13-9 as your final score. And the whole ironic part of this is it probably dooms the Big East Conference for football. So, Pitt decides to like find itself and pull an upset at absolutely probably the worst time ever. So I don't know. Maybe if WVU wins this game, everybody's still in the Big East. I don't know. So probably not.
Yeah, we did a whole episode about the 13-9 game. And I said at the time, I'll say it again. All I remember about that season was Steve, you getting all upset. There was a lot of calls that went against Pitt that year. And you were totally in like, oh, they don't want Pitt to win mode. And I just remember like that whole season, I'm like, yeah, I mean, there's bad calls that go against everybody, Steve. Like, I don't think they're just out to get Pitt. Like, let's not be homers. Like, I just remember like trying to talk you off the ledge that whole season. Then when that game happened, I was like, oh my God, Steve was right. Like, Steve was right. I mean, it was just so egregious and it was so, and I don't know about the whole season, but that game was important to the Big East. We went through it again, go listen to that episode because there was so much fallout over that game. And you could make the argument, you really could make the argument that that game destroyed the Big East Conference. And if WVU had won, it might still be going today. You could make that argument. And for that reason, I really do think they needed WVU to win. And when you look at the replay, some of those calls, how late the flags were, you can't help but just wonder.
Well, it didn't matter. And Mike Tranghesi's in officials. I mean, Mike Tranghesi's been retired for years now. I'm sure he's sitting on his mountain of Big East cash somewhere. So, and the Big East still has a winning football bowl record against the SEC. So that'll never go away. So, on to another team that we really don't talk much about, but for all you Penn State fans, here it is. We're gonna talk about your favorite team, and I'm probably gonna enjoy this way more than I really should. So, Schadenfreude, thy name is Steve, I guess today, and that is taking pleasure in the suffering of others, which I am going to right now. So, this is called Michigan gets an extra 2 seconds against Penn State. Halfway through the season, Penn State is undefeated and ranked number 8 at the time. They're playing Michigan, who has 3 losses, but is no longer ranked after a loss to Minnesota the week before. And that was the Minnesota Golden Gophers, not the Minnesota Vikings. So that was a pretty bad way to lose there. So the game goes into the fourth quarter, and with 53 seconds to go and Penn State up 25-21, Michigan is mounting a desperation drive. Chad Henne completes a pass, and the receiver gets tackled in bounds, and Michigan calls a timeout. But what happened was, I guess, like in between the player being called down and then being granted the timeout, a couple seconds had run off the clock. So Michigan, since there's a timeout, Michigan head coach Lloyd Card argues with the officials during the timeout and actually talks them in. Now, this is in Ann Arbor, so this is in Michigan. He talks them into putting 2 seconds back on the clock. And the official said, oh, we didn't stop the clock quick enough. So just because he's Lloyd Carr and it's Michigan and reasons, the Michigan now has 30 seconds instead of 28. The Joe Paterno quote about adding time for Michigan, they said they were putting 2 seconds back on the clock. And Paterno, whose team outgained Michigan but missed 2 field goals, said, baloney, and then walked away from me. So that was Joe Paterno's thoughts on the game. And that, where's my Ovaltine or cream of wheat or whatever? I don't know. But so he walked away from me. Right now, all I am is angry. That's what Joe Paterno was. He was just, the bee's knees. But so it's no big deal. What can you do in 2 seconds anyway? Well, except Michigan scores later in the drive on 4th and 4 with how much time do you think was left on the clock on that 4th down play, Tim?
2 seconds.
Yay! Oops. So it's Mario Manningham with the catch for the game winner. And I mean, that's probably like his most favorite famous catch, right? Oh no, he made one in the Super Bowl a couple years later, but the Penn State defender on the play, which I still laugh about this to this day, like because I used to had this on my DVR. I'm such a like horrible person that I recorded the end of this game on my DVR that I got rid of a couple years. I that was the only thing. I had a DVR in my basement for years, and I finally had to get rid of it because it just didn't work anymore. But uh, he was guarding the eye in the Michigan, like you know how Michigan has in their end zone, like their name written out, and like he literally just stood on the eye and let Mario Manningham like run by him. It's like, what did you think? Like the eye was going to score? But no, you might want to guard that guy catching the ball. Yeah. The best part is it ruins Penn State's season. Well, I guess the worst part, if you're a Penn State fan, they finished with one loss, and they actually third in the national rankings, so they didn't get a national championship that year. But I mean, a good time was had by all, and Penn State got kind of stuck to them there in Michigan. Maybe don't join a big conference where the only two teams that matter would be Ohio State, Michigan. Hey, Pitt, if you're listening, don't do the same thing where Florida State and Clemson are really the only two teams that matter. Or if you're in basketball, Duke and North Carolina. Well, moving on. Moving on with that. That's enough for the. I hope you Penn State fans enjoyed that moment of Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast.
Couldn't happen to a nicer team.
Yeah. So another going back to baseball, paying over slot in the Major League Baseball draft. The Pirates, to their credit, finally get smart and they find a loophole in the baseball draft system by vastly overpaying 8-year-old prospects like in 2011, Josh Bell. Josh Bell was, I'm going to play for the University of Texas. Well, the Pirates said, how about we select you in the second round of the Major League Baseball draft and pay you like a cool $5 million. You can send you and anybody else you want to know to the University of Texas. And he says, you know what? The eyes of the Texas are not upon me. I'm going to play baseball. So it was a great move by the Pirates because when he would become eligible for arbitration, if like, let's say he was really good, like, I don't know, Garrett Cole, when the Yankees decided they wanted to sign him for like their billions of dollars, guess who makes back all the money that you just spent in overpaying in slot? Well, you do because of the luxury tax. So that really was bad for the Yankees and really good for the Pirates. And so, as of our previous conversation, like with Chung Ho Gong, when something is bad for the Yankees and good for the Pirates, what do you think the baseball does? Rule fairly? No, we'll have none of that. So the very next year, baseball decides that they're going to have a salary cap, but it'll only be on rookies. So they basically put a salary cap on the small market teams, but none on the large market teams. What a well-run sport. Who wouldn't want to watch this wonderful sport of baseball where you either strike out or hit a home run? Games last 7 hours, and the only teams that matter are either in Los Angeles or New York or Boston. Yay, me, sign me up. Even the English Premier League or the Spanish La Liga isn't obviously rigged like this for the big teams. It's a complete joke. Baseball's a joke. That's why, like, it's just every year it loses more and more fans, and good for them. At some point, I hope it's just, 3 teams playing there.
You left out the decades of drug abuse and performance enhancing drugs that nobody felt was a big enough problem to do anything about. Also,
there you go. Fun times were all. So staying on the theme of like leagues changing the rules just because they didn't like one team, we'll go to the 1978 pass interference rule change by the NFL. So in 1978, prior to the season, the Steelers had won 2 Super Bowls, and they had done that with a bruising running game and a great bruising defense. So to counter all of this, the NFL in general, and one coach in particular, who may have had a team in Florida at that time, decide to stick it to those pesky Steelers. So Don Shula and some of the other offensive-minded coaches in the league, they get together and they voted on changing the pass interference rules. and they changed it to where you had the 5 yard. You could only, before then you could hit a guy up and down, a receiver up and down the field anywhere. They moved it to where you could only do it within the first 5 yards, and also they made it to where the offensive line could hold. Basically, they like, I think before you had to keep your arms like inside your body, and then after that you could kind of grab onto a guy. So they basically legalized holding. So Shula's quote was, "For the receiver, it means freedom to run his pattern. It will also force the defensive team to commit itself sooner, and this will give the quarterback a better chance to read the type of defense faster, as long as that quarterback isn't David Woodley. If the quarterback wants to get in a bump at the wide receiver, will have to come up far enough to do it within the yards. If he hangs back, he gets no bump at all. Either way, the quarterback has a better chance to pick it up. When you combine that with the liberalized holding for better pass, he literally says the word holding here, for better pass protection, you increase the chances of completing passes." So, Don Shula figures that's the end of the Steelers. We won't hear from them for another 40 years. They'll go back to stinking. Well, Coach Chuck Noll, who, like, I totally gained a lot more respect doing research for this, and he just adjusted like all great coaches do. So Chuck Noll, the rule change upset Coach Noll, who years later said of the teams who supported the change, "They ganged up on us the way they legislated the rules. People were trying to win a championship through legislation. I don't think you do that. But whatever the rules are, you have to adjust to them and play with them." When they changed the rules, Terry took advantage and his passing game blossomed. And all that happened to Mel Blount is he got more interceptions. Can you say total backfire by Don Shula? As that season, the Steelers adjusted and beat the Cowboys in a high-scoring Super Bowl, 35-31. And conversely, in 1978, after the rules changed, the Dolphins made the playoffs, but they lost to Houston, only scoring 9 points. I guess they didn't call enough pass interference calls for Don Shula and Don Strock, or I don't think even Wolf Woodley was there yet. That was so long ago. By comparison, Shula only went to one more Super Bowl in his whole career after that rule change, and he never won a championship after the rule change in 1978. The Steelers and Coach Noll went on to win 2 more Super Bowls after the 1978 rule change. I think in those meetings also, I heard that other rule changes that were proposed but rejected were to have Terry Bradshaw play blindfolded. While playing defense, have Donnie Shell and Mal Blount have their legs tied together like a 3-legged race. And also, Hall of Fame defensive lineman Mean Joe Green would have to count to 5 Mississippi before rushing the quarterback like a backyard football. But in their wisdom, I guess they just that would have just been too much. But
That would have been just too obvious. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. He
it's
didn't got the 5 Mississippi.
yeah. Could you imagine that call? Only 4 Mississippi, 5 yards on the defense. I think when everybody, the 78 Steelers are often talked about as one of the greatest teams of all time. And I don't know that that's always mentioned when people are talking about why they're the greatest team of all time or one of the greatest teams. Like, they literally changed the rules because the Steelers were too good. And then the Steelers won 2 Super Bowls. Like, that was literally, like, that's literally what happened. Like, they changed the rules to make this, like, no, the Steelers are just way too dominant. Their defense is too good. And then they win 2 more Super Bowls. And they, by the way, Steve, they played Miami in the playoffs in '79, and they beat them, I think, pretty handily, if I remember. So
yeah, I didn't look. I just looked up the 78 stats because I wanted to get like a 1-to-1. I didn't look. Besides, I knew that Shula had only gone to 1 Super Bowl with Marino. So finally he gets his quarterback, and then he neglects his defense. So yeah, great coaching job there, Don. Maybe they should have made a rule where everybody has to eat at Shula's Steakhouse before the game. Maybe that would have helped them out. I don't know. But that's enough Don Shula hate for this podcast. I don't hate Don Shula. That was just annoying. It was just beneath him, really. He probably was a much better coach than that. Now on to the, get ready for my blood pressure to go up and to me really get irritated if I haven't been irritated enough. Jesse James. Do I even need to catch no catch after that? So Jesse James was not a bank train robber from the 19th century. He also was a tight end for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So going into this game was a showdown of the top two teams in the AFC that year, New England and Pittsburgh. It's happened a lot. The Steelers had an 8-game winning streak. They needed to win this game to secure home field advantage for the playoffs. Late in the game, with the Steelers trailing 27-24 after a Dion Lewis TD for New England, the Steelers drive into Patriots territory, and Jesse James makes an apparent catch for a touchdown. So, as Jesse James is catching the ball, he takes, like, what would you say, 3 steps, Tim? Maybe 4? I mean, he caught the ball like at the 5 or just inside it. And
Well, he catches it. He catches it, yeah, inside the 5. But then after he catches it, he turns his body, extends his arms to try to reach over the goal line. Like he literally
Yeah.
makes a turn. Like he catches it in his arms, then he turns. He
Yeah.
doesn't dive to catch it. He catches it, then turns, reaches his arms out to cross the goal line.
As he's going to the ground, the ball, and I'm going to describe this how I see it. And if you think you saw it some other way, you were God. You were perfectly entitled to your own, I guess, interpretation of what happened on that video. The ball spins on his hand. The ball never touches the ground. I never see the ball definitively touch the ground, much like we said in the early where the white shoes and the white pants on the sideline. I couldn't see whether that guy was in and out on the replay. On this replay, you never see the ball touch the ground. So the rule had been changed earlier to say a player had to keep possession all the way through to survive the ground. It used to be, and now it's gone back to this, whereas both hands on the ball, both feet on the ground, control the ball and a football move, right? That's still the rule now. They went back to this after this silliness. And there had been all kinds of examples since they changed the rule to this of like weird stuff. Like Calvin Johnson had caught a ball that had not been called a catch because he kind of like he took it like in his hand, like he like palmed the football in his one hand and like then touched the ground with it in the end zone. But he had like caught the ball in the air, got both feet down, like turned around, and as he was getting up, he just like used the football to get up, kind of. And they called that not a catch. There was also a Dez Bryant catch against Green Bay in 2014 where he caught the ball and he just was like falling forward. He wasn't even reaching out really, and the ball came out when he hit the ground. It's probably the review was by a guy named Alberto Rivieron, and he's horrible. He's a horrible official. I mean, it's a bad rule and a bad official. And there's actually evidence earlier in the year of the Patriots had the exact kind of catch against the Texans in week 3 where the guy did the same thing. Brandon Cooks draw, you can literally see the ball hit the ground. It's the same type of play. He catches the ball in the end zone, and then when he goes to the ground, you see the ball, and Riverion calls it a catch. So he literally rules against himself both ways. So I guess no matter what happens, as long as the Patriots, whatever the Patriots need the call to be, that's what the call is going to be. So it's probably the most one-sided, perfect example of I'm not sure why the league was so much in the Patriots' pocket back then. If there was just they're getting two kinds of crazy ratings, or just the hate made people tune in. It's a bad rule. They changed it back, like I said, to the old football move rule, which whatever a football move is, you can debate till the cows come home. But you know what? It doesn't matter because Ben on the next play throws an interception 2 plays later. If he wasn't done that, I think what was the score? Was it still it was 3 points? They could have kicked the field goal and went into overtime.
Right. And if they win in overtime, then people would remember it, but not the way that they do now.
Yeah. Yeah, and a great quote by Jesse James was, "You expect the worst whenever it's put in someone in New York's hands." That was Jesse James' quote on the matter. It's once again the Steelers just didn't really overcome it, and throwing that interception late, that was such a bad. Roethlisberger really made a bad play there, so Ben, not so good on that one. But I don't know what else to say about it. it's one of the more egregious and one-sided calls I think I've ever seen in sports that's gone against the team that, is one of my favorite teams. And I can't remember anything else where, like, there's been a few other games I've watched where I knew, like, I remember there was a Bills game against the Dolphins when Jimmy Johnson was there, where the Bills just got stuck it to every time. Like, Andre Reed got called for ridiculous stuff. It was just so obvious, like they wanted the Dolphins to win that game. That was like when Doug Flutie was their quarterback. I mean, it's just. But besides that, I can't remember like too many games where it was pretty blatantly obvious who the league wanted to win and who they wanted to lose.
I still can't believe that call. And I remember walking out of the stadium. I just couldn't, I didn't even have words. I just was like, I can't, like, that didn't just happen. There's no way that just happened. I could not believe it. I remember when they were reviewing it, because I thought they were reviewing it like, did he cross the line or not? Like, are they going to place it at the 1 yard line? Right. That's what I thought they were reviewing. And when they came out and said no catch, I was like, how is it no catch? That, like, it was like anybody that saw that with their naked eye would say that's a catch. And even with the controlling the ball, surviving the ground, like you said, Steve, it never hit the ground. So it doesn't even make sense. Like, it doesn't have to hit the ground. Even if it bobbles in his hand, it still was on top of the, no, you're right. This one, I'm already getting upset thinking about it. So,
And there's like so much backstory. There was a game in the NFC Championship game where who was it for the Bucks, I think, caught a pass, but he used the ground to help him catch it, and they called it incomplete because
right.
they tried to include it so that, like, if the ball just incidentally hit the ground but you had control of it, like, it's just classic NFL overreacting because some owner is sitting there whining in the winter meetings. Oh, my team, the Glazers, whoever owned the Buccaneers at the time, was sitting there whining and crying. So. Well, that's enough of the against. Let's go to the for. Yay. These are the ones that went in our favor. Mike Renfro catch. So in 1979, the Steelers have won 3 Super Bowls in 5 years. They have the most Super Bowls by any team at that time, I do believe. Yeah. They have finished with a 12-4 record due to the Chargers losing the AFC Championship. Losing the AFC Championship game is played in Pittsburgh. The Houston Oilers have been good for a couple years. They have players like Dan Pastorini, Earl Campbell, and head coach Bud Adams. His son, the other Adams, is a coach too on the team. Or is that Wade Phillips? No, that was not his son. Wade. Is that Wade? Yeah, Wade Phillips.
You're thinking of Bum Phillips.
Yeah.
Bud Adams was the owner.
Yeah, Bum Phillips. Wade Phillips is yeah.
Yeah, and he was one of the coordinators at that time.
Yeah, right? Because he in the replays after this catch,
he's the one.
That was a catch. That was a catch.
He was the one that they had to bleep out on the NFL films.
Yeah. But Houston is probably it quite honestly is a very good team. They're kind of like the Avis of the NFL. They're number 2 and trying harder. Like if it weren't for the Steelers, they probably would have won a Super Bowl one time in those late 70s era. The Oilers lost to the Steelers 34-9 the previous year in the playoffs. In the third quarter, with Houston trailing by a touchdown, Pastorini throws a lob pass to Mike Renfro in the corner of the end zone. If you watch the TV replay, it's pretty clear that Renfro gets both feet down. This is a no-doubter. But for some reason, the ref in the end zone missed the call. Renfro on the replay, you can see he's not happy. He later said that the crowd in Pittsburgh intimidated the officials. And if the game would have been in Houston, the call would have gone his way. So score one for you Steeler fans. Tim, I guess you were too young to be.
I was not at that one. Yeah. Would have been like 2 years old.
Maybe your dad was really giving Mike for the rest
probably,
of his days. That wasn't it. Yeah. But no instant replay, so the call couldn't be overturned. Even radio commentator for the Steelers, Myron Cope, called it a TD. Merlin Olsen, the TV color commentator, decides to send flowers to Coach Bum Phillips as an apology for the bad call. It's a reference. Merlin Olsen used to do FTD commercials, so we'll have one of those posted. Hopefully, I think I put one of those on the website too for us. But the Steelers score a late TD to clinch the game, making the final score 27-13. So it may I mean, maybe they tie the game there, the Houston Tyler's game, but this wasn't a done deal. And it's not like the Oilers were going to be on their way to the Super Bowl if they had scored there. The Steelers have been in so many games like this by that point in the franchise. I don't think Terry Bradshaw or, Franco Harris or Jack, Lambert are going to blink just because they're in a tie game late with Houston. They've been in Super Bowls. They can handle this. So the dynasty, seemed to thrive in these situations. So I wouldn't put too much stock. Like Ed Bouchette always has said that, well, they won by 2 touchdowns. Okay. Now the final score is 27-21. Big deal, Woohoo.
Yeah, I remember Dwight White saying the same thing. It's like big deal. We went down and scored on the next drive anyway. So what difference does it make? And that's probably a fair point. But just the call by itself, it was pretty egregious. I mean,
it's pretty obvious. He has both feet in. It's
he
not
has
even
both
close.
feet in bounds.
Yeah.
And they really hosed the Oilers on that call. So I mean, just to be totally fair, that was just an awful, awful call. And that actually led to, they didn't institute it till the mid to late 80s, but that was one of the big drivers for replay. Like that was the big argument in the offseason. Like we desperately need instant replay because of that play.
Yeah. So on to hockey, whistle in the 2017 Cup Finals. So the Penguins are on the verge of winning their 5th Stanley Cup. They're leading the series 3-2 after winning Game 5 in Nashville 6-0. It's a must-win game for Nashville to force a Game 7 in Pittsburgh. And early in the second period, a Philip Forsberg shot handcuffs Matt Murray, and it slips through between his arm and body and is loose in the crease where it's poked into an empty net by Colton Sissons. Sissons? I don't know how to say his name. Unfortunately, referee Kevin Pollock, who's no relation to Lieutenant Weinberg, blows his whistle prematurely. Now, I used to have that problem now, but I just think about baseball, to quote the Naked Gun again. But I guess the ref just saw Murray just pin it just for a second and couldn't see it on the other side because Murray was in the way, so he blew his whistle, even though the puck was still loose. And because he blew his whistle, they can't do anything to replay it. And if you can hear the whistle really go. Like it's just bad luck. Once again, it's kind of one of those bad luck thing. The game remains 0-0 until late in the game when Patrick Hornquist scores with 1:35 left. Nashville captain Mike Fisher was very diplomatic after the game, saying about the call, "That's sports." I mean, to Nashville, that was a bad break, but they did have 2 more periods after that to score more than 0 goals. And I'm not like a math whiz or anything, Tim. Maybe you can help me out here with this one, but I don't think you can scoring 0. And I'm pretty sure the NHL got rid of ties a while ago. So, right, you need more than 0 to win.
You do. I mean, I think, I guess if you're a Nashville fan, the argument you could make was it was such a tight game. It was 0-0 all the way until the last minute of regulation. And them getting the first goal may have changed the way that they played. Remember, their best player was Pekka Rinne. And
Pekka Rinne gave up like 30 goals by that point in the series.
Well, but not in Nashville. Remember that series? The Penguins.
Yeah, it was a home and home.
Yeah. All 3 games the Penguins won were in Pittsburgh, but when they played Nashville, Rinne was lights out, and he was lights out for 98% of that game until the last minute. They got one by him. So the argument would have been, hey, if they got the first goal, that would have changed the whole momentum. That first goal is so important. And like you said, Steve, it wasn't a bad call. Like it was the right call, supposedly. Like you couldn't change it, but he did blow the whistle when like the puck wasn't. It didn't even. And it wasn't one of those things where like Murray had and it squirted out after a few seconds. It literally just went right through him, but the referee just blew the whistle anyway. It was definitely a really bad call.
I think the ref thought it was in his glove. I really do.
Yeah, he did. So it was unfortunate for Nashville, but like Mike Fisher said before he went home to his rich and famous wife, that's just what sports. That's sports sometimes.
Pecorino, I just not a big believer. I think the Penguins own him. I just think the Penguins aren't own certain goal. I don't say I have any confidence in Pecorino.
Again,
I,
I'm trying to
yeah.
make the argument from a Nashville fan
I
perspective,
got you.
and
Yeah, and
I think it wouldn't
Matt
be a
Murray had
ridiculous
found his
argument,
game. Yeah, Murray had found his game those last two games. He had back-to-back shutouts.
right?
That's what really carried the Penguins to their cup. But I will say this: give it to Nashville fans, man. They went crazy. They went hockey crazy that postseason. That's what I remember. I remember it was kind of annoying, but then I was like, well, we were probably like that when we were in '91 and we finally won our first cup. So all
It
the
was
established fans were probably like annoyed with us too. So
yeah, it was cool. I like it was really neat to see them so excited, like they were like filling the streets and the nights of the games. I mean, I was almost a little bit jealous because like, wow, look how, and it was like it was kind of like when we beat the Arizona Cardinals in the Super Bowl. Man, if they were just playing any other team but us, I would totally be rooting for this town and this team and these players. But they're playing us, so I don't want to root for us.
well, the Cordell touchdown catch in the '95 AFC title game. The Steelers have made the '95 AFC title game after a playoff blowout win against Buffalo the week before. They'll face the Indianapolis Colts with Captain Comeback Jim Harbaugh at quarterback. Neil O'Donnell struggles early, throwing an interception to Colts defender Jeff Herod on a tipped pass by Tony Saragusa. The Colts lead late in the half, 6-3, and the Steelers drive to the Colts 6-yard line. And I know this is hard to believe, but Neil O'Donnell scrambles around and finds Cordell Stewart in the back of the end zone for a touchdown. But when they show the replay, Cordell had like kind of half stepped out of bounds before coming back in and then catching the ball. And because of there's a rule, you can't be the first offensive player to touch the ball after going out of bounds. I think the rule's been changed where you just have to reestablish. You just have to get both feet in for like a second or two. And I think the reason for this rule was you can't like avoid like defenders by like, ooh, I'm running up the sideline. You can't, you can't do anything, and then just like jump off the sideline. Like, here I am. So I guess that makes sense to me as a rule. But the officials missed it, and there was no replay. This was like that. You said there was replay for a couple years in the '80s, and then it went away for a while, and then this was like kind of like a couple years later, replay came back, and this is probably one of the plays that brought replay back.
Yes, yeah, that was bad, and that was another tight game where the Steelers really was that their only touchdown of that? No, well, until the last
Bam
minute.
Marsh,
yeah. But I mean, it was a tight, low-scoring game, and that made if the Colts hold them to a field goal there, which they would have had that play not counted, that could have been a very different game.
Yeah, I mean, the officials missed it, and the TD had to stand. Jim Harbaugh called the play a wash since there was a pass interference that could have been called against the Colts for a Steelers TD earlier in the half, where the Colts held them to a field goal. To the Colts' credit, they didn't fade or go and oh boo-hoo, I got screwed. Oh, I'm the Seattle Seahawks. They came back and held a 16-13 lead late in the game. And they actually almost won on a desperation Hail Mary. I actually watched that Hail Mary. I didn't realize how close that was to getting like the Steeler defender Myron Bell actually does knock it into the hands of Floyd. I think it was the receiver for the Colts. So that was really close to being completed.
Yes.
The Steelers went on to lose in Super Bowl 30. They wouldn't go back to the Super Bowl for another 10 years. As for the Colts, they went into horrible mode. And they didn't really recover that until they drafted some guy named Peyton Manning and won their own Super Bowl in 2006. So I guess that Peyton Manning guy worked out for them okay.
He was all right.
Yeah. So, Tim, Hines Ward in the 2000 playoffs. What was 2007 playoffs? What was going on with that one?
So we covered this one too in a previous episode. I think it was our top 10 forgotten stories. And the forgotten story here was how Hines Ward almost cheated the Steelers to a playoff victory. The Steelers were playing the Jaguars in the 2007 playoffs. They're real late in the game. They have 4th and goal, and they have to score a touchdown. I mean, if they don't score a touchdown, then the game's practically over. They throw a fade pass to Hines Ward in the corner of the end zone. It's way over his head, and the Jaguars are going to take over and potentially hold on to win the game. but Hines Ward grabs the defender's face mask. He literally like sticks his arm up in the guy's face mask. Then as he's pulling it away, it kind of looks like the guy's holding him, but he's not. It was totally coordinated by Ward, and the rest fell for it. It was a complete acting job, and the referees call pass interference. The Jacksonville guys just jumping up and down, going crazy. He can't believe it. And the Steelers get 1st and goal from the 1, and they score the go-ahead touchdown. And as I said in that previous episode, I feel like that play would have gotten a lot more remembered, especially by the Jacksonville fans, if not for the fact that the Jaguars actually come back and win the game anyway. And Steve, there was some controversy there as well. In that it was kind of funny. There was that bad call, but then there was another bad call that helped the Jaguars later. So maybe that did even things out a little bit in that game.
Yeah, they got the Steelers got a league apology because they were, I think Aaron Smith was Smith hurt by one of the defenders on that 4th and 2 play by Garrard got held pretty blatantly. Ben played a horrible game. He had 3 interceptions, at least in the first half. Another great Tomlin, if he just would have kicked the extra points after scoring in the 4th quarter instead of going for 2 twice, the go-ahead field goal would have only tied the game. Jacksonville went on to lose to New England 31-20 the next week. And that was during New England's undefeated season run, which ended in Super Bowl disappointment for them. Here's a fun fact. The Jacksonville Jagoffs have never played in a Super Bowl. And the Steelers went on to win Super Bowl 43 like the next year. So
yeah,
I don't know.
That
Jacksonville annoys me for some reason. I don't know. I just never liked Jacksonville. Maybe it was just Tom Coughlin and Jack. They always have like a jerk coach down there.
And that team in 2007 was pretty good. They won the division, but by that time they were pretty beat up. They had lost a lot of guys, and even if they had won, they probably weren't going to go beat undefeated New England the next week. So I don't know. I just the calls at the end of the game like that they should have been holding, but again, I mean, people just don't remember. Hines Ward was one of those guys that if he played for any other team, we all would have just despised the guy. What a cheater, what a cheap shot artist. Hate that guy so much, but because he played for the Steelers, he's canonized here in Pittsburgh, and that's fine. I like Hines Ward, so I'm not complaining, but that was cheap. I mean, he really got away with one there, and Jacksonville almost got eliminated from the playoffs because of that.
Well, I wouldn't have been too disappointed by that, I guess. I don't know. And so there's a pass we have next one. It's called pass interference call in the 1984 Niners game.
So this one, the 1984, the 49ers are at the height of their powers with Joe Montana and Bill Walsh, and they're playing at home in the middle of the season against the Steelers, and the Steelers are playing them pretty tight, but they're down by 7 late in the game, and the Steelers have 4th and goal. So similar to that Jacksonville game, right? 4th and goal, and in this case, the Steelers were down by 7, so the best they can do is tie, but they had to go for it because they're not going to have another shot potentially after this. And Mark Malone was the Steelers quarterback. He throws a pass in the end zone. It's broken up, but there's a flag and it's pass interference. And it is an incredibly ticky-tack pass interference call. Again, if you look at the replay, it's really not pass interference. And again, the 49ers are jumping up and down. They can't believe it. The Steelers get a fresh set of downs. They tie the game, and then they go on to win the game. And you know, this is another one of the things, like you said, Steve, that you always go back to the bad calls, but then you think about what happened after that. And this tied the game. Well, the 49ers had Joe Montana, and they got the ball back with a few minutes left. So all they had to do was drive down the field and kick the game-winning field goal. But Montana throws an interception to Brian Hinkle, of all people. Brian Hinkle was a linebacker who was not a bad linebacker, but he's not Rod Woodson or Mel Blount. And Brian Hinkle picks off Joe Montana, and the Steelers get the go-ahead field goal. And even after that, the 49ers still had time to get in the field goal range, and they missed the potentially game-tying field goal.
Was that Ray Wershin who missed that? Because
it was Ray Wershin.
I only knew that from Tecmo Bowl. I only knew it when I saw because that's Ray Wershin from Tecmo Bowl.
And I think he was one of those old school like straight-on kickers. And it was like a 37, 38 yard kick, so it wasn't a chip shot, but but again, I mean, they had 2 chances after that, but I think the reason that it's remembered, well, definitely one reason, the 49ers, that was the only game they lost the whole season, was that Steeler game.
Yeah,
They
they
win
went
the
to
Super
Super
Bowl.
Bowl and well, that was the Dolphins. They beat the
Yeah,
Dolphins in the yeah.
they finished that year 18-1. So if that 4th and goal stands and they don't call pass interference, then they probably win, because they're probably not giving the Steelers the ball back. And even if they do, Mark Malone wasn't going to lead the heroic game tying touchdown drive. I mean, let's just be honest. So you could actually argue that that pass interference call cost the 49ers a perfect season.
Well, I guess they're really disappointed that they'll just have to settle for their Super Bowl winning 18-1 season. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was pretty unbelievable. I mean, that whole game was unbelievable. Brian Hinkle, intercepting the best quarterback of the era. I mean, it just sometimes you're on. And the funny thing about that season was the Steelers actually played in the AFC Championship game that year, which again, no one would ever remember,
Against the Dolphins, yeah.
against the Dolphins. And so they almost, like, they were one game away from a rematch in the Super Bowl with the 49ers. Now I could say with a lot of certainty that there's no way the Steelers would have beaten them in the Super Bowl, but wouldn't that have been interesting? The one team that they lost to all year would be the team they play in the Super Bowl.
It would have been a storyline, that's for sure.
And that probably would have been all that it would have been.
Yeah. It's like, and then they got blown out.
Yeah.
I mean, because the Dolphins kind of hung with them for a little bit, but then in the second half faded. And that was what Marino's rookie year, right? Yeah.
It was his second year. It was the year,
okay.
and I think that was the year that he had 50 touchdown passes. I mean,
Yeah.
he was, which was unheard of at the time. I mean, that would be huge today, but that was like unheard of. And yeah, he could do nothing against San Francisco. So Mark Malone probably wouldn't have fared better. Just throwing that out there.
Well, it's all in the isotoners. Maybe we can. So now we move out of the 4 to the overblown, which is just exaggerated in importance, probably didn't affect the game as much as people would like to think of. And this could be for or against the Steelers. The Steelers are going for one for the thumb in their first Super Bowl appearance in 10 years, the Super Bowl 40. They are playing the Seattle Seahawks. And there's a couple plays in this one. In the first quarter, the Seahawks have a TD taken off the board as Darrell Jackson is determined to push off against Chris Hope. We covered this in the podcast for when we did the third one on the Super Bowl, so 41. He did push off. It was not like egregious. I mean, he pushed off. I mean, it wasn't like super bad, but you could call it. Another call was Sean Locklear holding call that eliminated a 1st and goal for the Seahawks. Also, Ben scored a touchdown that was a close call in the first half. So there was definitely some close calls and some controversial ones that the Seahawks just seemed to can't get over or leave alone. And it's still on the internet. I was surprised, like there's like a whole Wikipedia page on controversies in the NFL, and this is one of them. And I don't like it. Bill Levy apologized, who was the referee for that game. He did apologize for the calls in a 2010 interview when he was in Seattle. His quote was, "It was a tough thing for me. I kicked 2 calls in the fourth quarter and I impacted the game. As an official, you never want to do that," said the veteran of 15 NFL seasons and 2 Super Bowls. "It left me with a lot of sleepless nights, and I think about it constantly," Levy said of the February 2006 game. "I'll go to my grave wishing that I had been better." I don't know, maybe Levy just said that to get out Seattle alive since he was there, like doing a preseason game or something. And it's just annoying. It's just annoying because it's like, oh, that's like my favorite Super Bowl. It's like the whole reason I've been a Steeler fan for like 20 years, and everybody's going to ruin it now with this stupidity. And I guess maybe the Patriots fans feel this way about when people bring up Deflategate, which, I mean, did having the balls like really just a little bit not quite, really help Tom Brady that much? Come on. So I don't know. I don't. That's why I just don't put much stock in those.
Yeah, we said when we did our trilogy of episodes about the 2005 Steelers, we said it then. These were close calls, not bad calls, and close calls yes, they mostly went against Seattle in that game, but they weren't egregious or bad calls. And it just, this narrative started up. It's such a bogus
It,
narrative.
yeah, and it never dies. It just keeps going and going and going and going, and it's just like, oh my goodness, it's horrible. Which brings us on to the next one. This one goes against the Steelers. It's onside kick interference, the 2000 collapse against the Eagles. The Steelers had taken a 23-13 lead with just 3 minutes left in regulation after a time-consuming drive which forced Philadelphia to use all 3 of their timeouts. So they're up by 10 with 3 minutes left. This is thus victory seems guaranteed, but the Eagles came back and won the game. They drove down the field for a touchdown and they recovered an onside kick, kicked the field goal, then won the game in overtime. The controversial part of this game is on the onside kick, one of the players interfered with Hines Ward's ability to catch the kick. That should have been a penalty, and the NFL did admit to that. And the overblown is because even with the recovery of the onside kick, the Steelers defense still had 3 chances to win the game. All they have to do is like stop the Eagles one of those 3 times, and they win. This is like, what's it? That was in that collapse of 2000, which
Well,
like in the 90s they started to do that every year. They would collapse at the end of the year.
and like you said at the beginning, up by 10, 3 minutes left, no timeouts for Philadelphia. Like, how can you pin that on one bad call? Like, that's just an all-out collapse.
Well, it's the genius of Andy Reid. You can't be stopped. So, yeah. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I think the collapses were more of the story that season than just this bad call. I mean, even though it was a bad call, but it was like one sequence of another events, like dominoes. Like if you pull out one of those sequences, it doesn't really, like, maybe it's the Steelers only win by 3 points, but they still win, you know? So once again, how you respond to a bad break is as important as, because bad breaks are going to, this is life. It's going to happen. On the next one, this is more recent. Eric Fisher for holding on the 2-point conversion attempt in the 2016 playoffs. This is definitely in the 4 category. So the Steelers and Chiefs meet in the divisional playoffs. Alex Smith is the quarterback for the Chiefs, and the Steelers hold a late 18-10 lead. Chris Boswell kicks an NFL playoff record 6 field goals for all of the Steelers' points that day. But the Chiefs, late in the game, drive down and score a touchdown with 2:43 to go in the game. So because it's so late in the game, the Chiefs go for 2, and they make the attempt with a pass completion to Demetrius Harris. But wait up, hold up. There's a flag on the play on the 2-point conversion. Away from the play, James Harrison is pulled down by tackle Eric Fisher, and holding is called. I think the big thing is holding is not normally called on like big plays like 4th downs, and like normally unless it's Harrison kind of flopped. I mean, Harrison gotten pretty good at that point. There were a lot of times when Harrison was held, but he kind of gotten like he'd get himself to lean against the tackle, and it would really look like he was being held, where maybe he was just kind of like making it look like that. But to his point, that's it was a flop that would have made James Harden, if you're an NBA fan, jealous. That's for sure. And also, he was so far away from Alex Smith when he threw the ball. I'm not even sure, even if like the tackle would have totally whiffed on the play, that he would have got a sack anyway. And there was still over 2 minutes left to go in the game. So, okay, it's a tie game. The Steelers have already kicked like 6 field goals. Who's to say Boswell doesn't kick a 7th, and it's not that far-fetched. In 2 minutes to drive the field isn't asking that much from Ben Roethlisberger and the offense that day. Give credit is the Eric Fisher had took responsibility for the penalty. Obviously, I'm frustrated with the call, with the game on the line, and for me to let the team down, it's going to be hard to let that one go. Travis Kelce was not so diplomatic. He was the most vocal of the people against the call, telling reporters it was horse poop. We'll edit that one. Edited. And the official shouldn't be able to allow the referee to officiate games anymore. Andy Reid wasn't happy about the call either. I'm not sure I completely agree with what took place, but it did, and the call was made, and we live with that. Reed said, I don't want to be fined any money, but I would tell you I was probably leaning the other way. I thought Fisher did what he needed to do on that particular block to get that done. But the problem is that when people slip, it can look worse than it is. He thought Harrison dove. It definitely, like I said, a James Harden esque. It's a thing. There was definitely Harrison had definitely gotten his flopping down there. The Chiefs draft Patrick Mahomes the next year in 2017 and become one of the more prolific offenses in league history. Andy Reid has as many Super Bowl wins as Mike Tomlin. And the Steelers go on to get blown out in the championship game by New England. Excuse me. Fun fact, as of 2021, this is the last playoff game that Mike Tomlin and Ben Roethlisberger have won. And Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, who were Steelers at the time, never win a Super Bowl with the Steelers. So a lot of fun stuff going on in the end of that one.
Yeah, another like maybe it was a little ticky tack, but it wasn't like just blatantly, you know, a miss. I mean, it wasn't the worst call ever. And like you said, the Kansas City, I think we even had a when we got the ball back, we had to convert a third down, or else we had to punt the ball back to them,
Right.
and they couldn't stop
Yeah.
us on the third down. So I mean, they had their chances after that.
And I mean, I guess they can't be too upset. They won a Super Bowl and been in another one since then. So
Yeah, you're welcome, Kansas City. That's what adversity does. It builds you into a champion. So
on to Benny Barnes' trip in Super Bowl 13. The Super Bowl 13, the Cowboys versus the Steelers in the Orange Bowl. And for once, the two best teams in the NFL that season actually meet in the Super Bowl. Hey, what a novel concept, It doesn't happen that often. And this game's amazing. This Super Bowl features 16 future NFL Hall of Famers. I'm not sure. I mean, I can't think of a game that has had that many in it. At the time, it was considered one of the greatest Super Bowls of all time. And it seems to be a little forgotten about on a national level. But Gil Brandt thought those were two great football teams. The Cowboys made mistakes. We had Randy White on the return team with a cast on, and then he fumbled the kickoff, which really hurt us. And even though we lost, I would say Super Bowl 13 was the greatest Super Bowl. So, hey, Gil Brandt thought so, and he's a pretty smart guy. On to the play. In the fourth quarter, the Steelers were leading 21-17 after Jackie Smith dropped the pass. I heard Jackie Smith was the sickest man in America after that. Yeah.
bless his heart.
Yeah. The Steelers are driving and on a pass play to Lynn Swan. And so what happens is they're running down the field and Benny Barnes trips, and so does Lynn Swan, and the ball falls incomplete. And so the officials determine that Benny Barnes had tripped Lynn Swan and call pass interference. So there's those 1978 Don Shula rules coming into play. This is an interesting thing. I was watching the NFL Films recap of this Super Bowl, and this is how John Facenda described the play. It was a reckless pass by Bradshaw. As Barnes fell down, Swan tripped over him. And I do believe after that, NFL Films cut to John Facenda wearing his Roger Staubach Cowboys jersey. John Facenda is from Philly. Who knew? I guess he's a big Cowboys fan. I don't know. But it's just like the most unbelievably biased commentary by like NFL Films I think I've ever seen. And it was like the Super Bowl. It wasn't like, like here's the Steelers fans one. It was odd. The Steelers would go on to score on a Franco Harris run of 22 yards. A play that Charlie Waters, the safety for the Cowboys, would still complain about later because the umpire got in his way on his way to tackle Franco Harris and have Super Bowl glory. Another fun fact, Fred Swearinger, who was the ref of the Immaculate Reception game, did this one too. I don't think Fred had to call up to the press box after that play, though. Cliff Harris did some more complaining. I don't know what to do. Maybe knock umpire Damas Flat and not Franco Flat. More Cry Boys. And the fun fact was that Franco run was the longest in Super Bowl history until Willie Parker's 75-yard run in Super Bowl 40. The score was then 28-17. The Steelers got the ball back in the ensuing kickoff and scored another TD when Randy White, who we'd mentioned early, who was playing with a cast on his hand, fumbled the kickoff. The Steelers scored again, making the score 35-17 with less than 7 minutes to go in the game. So, I mean, after that penalty, I mean, they gave up 2 more touchdowns, but it wasn't like bang, bang plays. So, the Cowboys had a chance to make plays. But to the Cowboys' credit, they did like rally to make it a final score of 35-31. So the Cowboys did show some character there, even though they did cry about a lot of it. The Steelers would go on to win another Super Bowl the next year. The Cowboys would not even get back to or win another Super Bowl until their 52-17 victory over the Bills in the 90s. I don't know if your dad's like an old time Steeler fan. Did he call them the Cry Boys? Because I remember like a lot of the old like Steeler fans always called them the Cry Boys.
He probably did. A lot of people did back then. There was even an early website, like back in the early days of the internet. It might have been called like cryboys.com, and it actually like listed every Dallas loss in the history of the franchise. Like that was the point of the website, to like list all the Dallas Cowboys losses. And like I said, this was like a 1995 era website.
Wow.
But yeah, that was a play where, I mean, yeah, he did trip. He didn't intentionally interfere. But I mean, if you watch the replay, how was Swan supposed to catch the ball? And isn't that like, it's not intense. It's just, did you impede the guy's ability or didn't you? And I think they were just like, well, we didn't do it on purpose. Like, well, okay, so I mean, like, I get it, you tripped over each other. I mean, I guess what they were saying is they should have called incidental contact, and maybe that's a fair argument, but whatever.
It wasn't like the ball was totally uncatchable either. And it's just so funny that like once again, you're the guy, like if you wouldn't have put in those rules in the off season, maybe that doesn't get called. So
Yep.
blame Don Shula for that one.
Well, and to your point, it wasn't like that decided the game. They had plenty of chances after that, and they let the Steelers score 2 more touchdowns.
Yeah, Jackie Smith drops a touchdown.
Yeah.
They fumble a kickoff. I don't know what to say. You had a lot of other opportunities to win that game, and to their credit, they did rally themselves after that. After they kind of gathered themselves,
They did,
they did make a game of it. So, that's as much sympathy as I can have for the Dallas Cowboys. So on to the ultimate, probably 4 call of all time that maybe is a little overblown, but it's legend. So here we go. The Immaculate Reception. And as most people know, in 1972, the Steelers go to the playoffs for the first time. And by like long time, I mean long time, like pre Dwight D. Eisenhower administration long. So, and for all you people who know Dwight D. Eisenhower, he was president in the 1950s. So actually, I think Truman was in office in 1947. So it was since the Truman administration. So he was before Eisenhower. But just for some reference and fun U.S. presidential history knowledge. So they play the Oakland Raiders in the first round of the playoffs. The Raiders have the lead 7-3 late in the game due to a long Kenny Stabler run. And on 4th and 10, Bradshaw throws a desperation pass that may have bounced off Raiders defensive back Jack Tatum or Steelers wide receiver Frenchie Fuqua. The deflected pass is caught out of the air by Franco Harris, who scores an improbable touchdown to win the game for Pittsburgh. Now, you say, oh, who cares? The ball bounced around. Well, at the time, there was a rule that stated that 2 offensive players could not touch the ball consecutively. So since Bradshaw threw the ball and then it hit off of Frenchie Fuqua and then Harris caught it, that would make the pass illegal. I don't know why that was a rule. I guess they didn't want you tipping it to yourself or another player like a volleyball. I don't know. but that's the rules, and I don't make them. I just don't try and break them. Uh, The Raiders claim that Fuqua touched the ball, of course. Referee Fred Swearinger calls up from the dugout to someone in the press box who may or may not have been Dan Rooney or Steelers PR director Joe Gordon, which, I mean, that sounds totally fair to me, Tim. I mean, who else would I ask? I'm not going to ask Al Davis what his opinion is. He's all the way in Oakland.
And he would be totally biased, whereas
Yeah.
I'm sure the Steelers people would have given an unbiased,
Yeah.
impartial answer.
Yeah. But it all sounds very legit to me. Swearinger then signals touchdown. The Raiders are great. They still complain about this call to this day. Defensive back George Atkinson, the play should be known as the Immaculate Deception, because the public was deceived, the officials were deceived, and we got deceived. John Madden, the coach of the Raiders that day, no matter how many times I watch the films of the Immaculate Reception play, I never know for sure what happened. John, here, I'll break it down for you. Franco caught the ball and scored. You lost. But moving on, there was a physics professor from CMU named John Fetkovich, and he claims that the ball had to hit Tatum to carry the 24 feet back to Franco Harris due to the laws of physics. And who am I to argue with the laws of physics or Mr. Professor Fetkovich? So I'm not a science denier. So there's science there. The Raiders, they do win a couple more Super Bowls and are actually one of the more successful team of the 1970s and early 80s, until a tracksuited Al Davis just goes nuts and decides to start moving the team all around the country and doesn't really pay attention to his football franchise, and they kind of fall into the state of disrepair they've been in a long time, which is a shame because the Raiders really are one of the great organizations in pro football, or at least they were. The Steelers lose the next week to the Dolphins during the Dolphins' 1972 undefeated season, but don't feel too bad for the Steelers. They go on to win 4 more Super Bowls. Franco gets his own statue in the airport besides George Washington. I mean, what did that Washington guy ever do for Pittsburgh? He never won us any football games. And also, if we ever discuss the Immaculate Reception, it always has to be mentioned with the reverence and awe that we reserve for the Pope and deceased relatives. So make sure you, observe it appropriately. So
It's a great question, Steve, though, that you raised. Why was that a role? I mean, I
I've
know,
always wondered that. I don't know. Yeah.
I know that's the controversy, but that's so dumb. Like today, that play would have had no controversy because it's like, oh, so who cares who it bounced off of? I mean, you feel like that's one of those things they put in like 1906, whenever like people weren't throwing forward passes and they were like, you can't touch the ball if another player touches the ball because they'll volley it to each other. Like what? I just don't know. There was no logical explanation for that. I'd love to hear why they had that role.
I've never had a good explanation for it, but like I said, I don't understand it. I don't know, but hey, Franco got a statue out of it, so who am I to argue?
Well, and the controversy is what makes the play, what is part of what makes the play like relive to this day.
Oh, and the guy who has the Immaculate Reception ball has it like in some like vault in like West Mifflin, where if you want to go see, you got to pay like $20. Like, so they're if you got nothing to do on like a Friday afternoon and you want to got $20 to blow, go see the Immaculate Reception ball. It's like I don't know. But that's it. That's the good, the bad, and the ugly. I hope you had some fun and catharsis with us. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of Pittsburgh Sports Memories.
Thanks, everybody.